Narcissists never hand you the whole truth about themselves. If they did, they would lose their grip on you completely. The carefully constructed image they present to the world depends on keeping you confused, questioning yourself, and constantly searching for answers that never quite arrive. If they were completely honest, the illusion would collapse. You would recognize the manipulation for what it is, stop blaming yourself, and begin walking away from the cycle that has kept you emotionally trapped. That is why so much of the relationship feels like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Every time you think you've finally figured things out, the picture changes again. One day they appear loving and devoted. The next they become cold, distant, or cruel without explanation. They don't want consistency because consistency creates clarity. Instead, they thrive on unpredictability. Confusion becomes their greatest weapon. Today, we're pulling back that curtain. We're going to look at 7 truths narcissists rarely, if ever, admit openly. These are not always conscious confessions sitting in the front of their minds. Many narcissists spend years convincing themselves of their own stories. But beneath the excuses, beneath the charm, beneath the confidence they project, these realities quietly drive much of their behavior. Understanding these truths is not about changing them, it is about freeing yourself. Because once you recognize the hidden mechanics behind the manipulation, their behavior begins to make sense. You stop personalizing their actions. You stop believing every cruel word they throw at you. And most importantly, you begin reclaiming your own reality. The first thing a narcissist will never admit is this: they know exactly when they're hurting you. One of the biggest lies victims are encouraged to believe is that the narcissist just doesn't realize how much damage they're causing. People around you might even reinforce this belief. They didn't mean it. They're just stressed. They're bad at expressing emotions. They had a difficult childhood. While difficult experiences can shape personality, they do not erase responsibility. A narcissist often has an extraordinary ability to detect emotional reactions. In fact, they spend an enormous amount of time studying them. They notice your facial expressions, your tone of voice, your moments of vulnerability, and your deepest insecurities. They collect emotional information the way a strategist gathers intelligence before a battle. Have you ever noticed how they seem to know exactly which words hurt you the most? They remember the insecurity you confessed months ago. They remember the mistake you deeply regret. They remember your fear of abandonment. Then, during an argument, those exact wounds suddenly become ammunition. That isn't random. That isn't poor communication. That is targeted behavior. Even after making you cry, they may suddenly become affectionate, apologize just enough to keep you invested, or pretend nothing happened. This cycle reveals something important. They recognize your pain. They simply don't value it enough to stop causing it. If they truly believed your suffering mattered as much as their own comfort, the cycle would end. Instead, your emotional reactions become evidence that they still have influence over you. The second truth they rarely admit is that they desperately need your attention far more than you need theirs. From the outside, narcissists often appear independent, confident, and emotionally untouchable. They give the impression that people are lucky just to be around them. But underneath that performance is a surprisingly fragile emotional foundation. Their sense of worth is often dependent on outside validation, praise, admiration, attention, fear, control, even conflict. To a narcissist, all of these become forms of emotional fuel. This explains something many survivors struggle to understand. Why does the narcissist keep coming back after they claim they never wanted you again? Why do they monitor your social media? Why do they send random messages months later? Why do they suddenly become interested when you finally move on? Because your attention has value. Not necessarily because they suddenly discovered genuine love, because your attention reassures them that they still matter. Silence unsettles them. Indifference unsettles them even more. When you stop reacting emotionally, they lose one of the mirrors they relied upon to reinforce their own importance. That's why emotional detachment often has a far greater impact than arguments ever could. Arguments still provide attention. Calm distance removes it. The third truth they will never willingly admit is that they study your kindness before they exploit it. Many people assume narcissists are simply attracted to weak individuals. That isn't accurate. In fact, they often pursue people who are compassionate, loyal, responsible, forgiving, intelligent, and emotionally invested. Those qualities aren't weaknesses, they're strengths. The problem is that narcissists frequently weaponize those strengths against their owners. Early in the relationship, they ask questions that seem innocent. What was your childhood like? What are your biggest fears? What kind of relationships have you had? What hurts you the most? Healthy people ask questions to build intimacy. Manipulative people ask questions to identify leverage. If they discover you're extremely forgiving, they'll keep pushing boundaries. If they learn you hate conflict, they'll use confrontation as intimidation. If they realize you constantly try to fix broken relationships, they'll create endless problems for you to solve. Before long, your greatest virtues become the very tools keeping you trapped. You remain because you're compassionate. You stay because you believe everyone deserves another chance. You continue explaining yourself because you assume misunderstandings can be resolved through honest communication. Meanwhile, they're operating according to an entirely different set of rules. The fourth truth is perhaps one of the most painful. They fear being truly known. This may sound strange because narcissists often appear obsessed with talking about themselves. They boast. They exaggerate achievements. They tell dramatic stories. They dominate conversations. But revealing information isn't the same as revealing authenticity. In reality, many narcissists carefully manage every detail other people see. The confident version, the successful version, the victimized version, the misunderstood genius, the endlessly generous partner. Each audience receives a different performance. Very few people ever meet the authentic individual beneath those carefully designed masks. Why? Because authenticity requires vulnerability. It requires admitting mistakes, accepting limitations, feeling genuine shame without immediately blaming someone else, owning failures without rewriting history. Those experiences threaten the identity they've spent years constructing. This is why criticism, even gentle criticism, often produces explosive reactions. You're not simply challenging one opinion. You're threatening an entire psychological structure built around appearing superior, innocent, or exceptional. If they admitted who they truly are, they would also have to confront emotions they've spent a lifetime avoiding. That feels intolerable. So denial becomes protection. Projection becomes protection. Blame becomes protection. The illusion survives. Authenticity does not. The fifth truth narcissists almost never admit is that they envy people who possess genuine inner peace. Envy isn't limited to money, beauty, or professional success. Sometimes they envy something much quieter. Your ability to laugh sincerely, your close friendships, your confidence that doesn't depend on applause, your emotional stability, your ability to apologize, your capacity to love without keeping score. These qualities expose something they struggle to maintain within themselves, a stable sense of identity. Rather than learning from those qualities, they often attempt to diminish them. If you're confident, they criticize you until you question yourself. If you're joyful, they create unnecessary drama. If you're successful, they minimize your accomplishments. If you're surrounded by supportive people, they try to isolate you. Why? Because your stability highlights their instability. Instead of rising to meet your emotional health, they attempt to lower yours. This explains why many victims notice that they gradually become anxious, insecure, exhausted, and emotionally confused after spending long periods with a narcissist. The environment itself becomes emotionally corrosive. You slowly lose the confidence you once carried naturally. The sixth truth they rarely acknowledge is that control feels safer to them than genuine love. Healthy love requires equality, mutual respect, trust, honesty, freedom. But freedom introduces uncertainty. People can disagree, people can leave, people can choose differently. Control attempts to eliminate that uncertainty. If they can monitor where you go, control who you speak to, influence how you dress, dictate your emotions, convince you that no one else will ever understand you, then they temporarily quiet their own internal insecurity. Notice something important. Many narcissists don't become angriest when you're disrespectful. They become angriest when you're independent, when you develop confidence, when you make decisions without consulting them, when you establish boundaries, when you succeed without their approval, when you discover happiness beyond their influence. Those moments remind them that they cannot fully control another human being. For someone whose emotional safety depends on dominance, that realization feels deeply threatening. Real love celebrates growth. Control fears it. Real love encourages independence. Control punishes it. Real love trusts. Control constantly monitors. Understanding this difference helps survivors stop confusing possessiveness with devotion. Someone trying to own your life is not demonstrating deeper love. They're demonstrating deeper insecurity. The seventh and perhaps most revealing truth is this: deep down, they know the mask cannot last forever. No matter how carefully they curate their image, reality eventually creates cracks. People notice inconsistencies. Friends begin comparing experiences. Family members observe repeated patterns. Partners finally connect the dots. Colleagues recognize manipulation. Children grow older and develop their own perspectives. The truth has a remarkable tendency to surface over time. This is one reason narcissists often move through repeated cycles of relationships, friendships, workplaces, or social circles. At first, everything appears perfect. The charm is powerful, the confidence is impressive, the charisma feels magnetic, but eventually the hidden behaviors become visible, the criticism increases, the entitlement emerges, the manipulation intensifies, the empathy disappears, and people begin distancing themselves. Rather than accepting responsibility, the narcissist often rewrites the story. My ex was crazy. My coworkers were jealous. My family never appreciated me. Everyone betrayed me. Each new audience hears a familiar narrative in which they remain the innocent victims surrounded by unreasonable people. Admitting the actual pattern would require confronting a painful possibility that the common denominator has always been them. That is a realization many narcissists fight desperately to avoid. For survivors, however, recognizing this pattern changes everything. You stop searching for the magical explanation that will finally make their behavior logical. You stop believing that one more conversation will suddenly awaken empathy they've repeatedly refused to practice. You stop carrying responsibility for problems you never created. Perhaps most importantly, you begin trusting your own perceptions again. Healing often starts with one simple realization. The confusion wasn't proof that you were broken. It was evidence that you were living inside someone else's carefully manufactured reality. The more clearly you see that reality, the less power it has over you. The goal is not to hate the narcissist. Hatred keeps you emotionally connected. The goal is understanding. Understanding allows you to detach without carrying endless questions. It allows you to replace self-doubt with clarity. It reminds you that genuine love never requires you to abandon yourself in order to keep someone else comfortable. Healthy relationships don't survive on secrecy, manipulation, fear, or emotional exhaustion. They thrive on honesty, accountability, mutual respect, and emotional safety. And once you've experienced that kind of relationship, whether with a partner, a friend, a family member, or even yourself, you begin to recognize just how different real love feels from control disguised as affection. The greatest truth a narcissist never wants you to discover is not merely who they are, it's who you become once you stop believing their version of reality. Because the moment you trust your own instincts again, the moment you stop chasing explanations they will never honestly give, the moment you realize your worth doesn't depend on their approval, their influence begins to fade, your confidence slowly returns, your voice becomes stronger, your boundaries become clearer, and the life that once revolved around managing someone else's emotions starts revolving around protecting your own peace. That is the truth they cannot control, and that is where your freedom begins. If that sounds like something you need to hear, stay with me, because by the end of this, you may recognize your entire relationship in a completely different light. Before I get into the list, I want to speak directly to anyone here who grew up as the child of a narcissistic parent, anyone who carries developmental trauma from that upbringing. I run a workshop specifically for people in that situation, held only twice a year, where we go deep into how childhood wounds inflicted by a narcissistic parent get carried silently into adulthood and replayed over and over in your adult relationships. In that workshop, we work on identifying those core wounds, understanding how they formed, and building the tools to finally stop attracting narcissistic partners into your life. Seats are limited, and there's an early registration discount available for a set number of participants, so if that resonates with you, look into it. Now let's get into the heart of this. The first thing a narcissist will never say to you plainly is this: being with me will make you feel more alone than you ever felt by yourself. That's the quiet, devastating truth sitting underneath every narcissistic relationship. There is no real connection happening. There is nobody to lean on, nobody to actually share your inner world with, even though on paper you are in a relationship. In practice, you are in something closer to a situationship dressed up as commitment. and the whole arrangement is built around the needs of exactly one person, and it isn't you. They remain close to you for a single reason: to keep drawing whatever supply they can extract from you, whether that's attention, admiration, emotional reactions, or simply control. Their presence in your life was never really about caring for you. It was about what you could provide for them. So whenever your needs come up, whenever you try to express an emotion or ask for something, it gets brushed aside, minimized, twisted until you're the one who looks unreasonable. You start to believe you're asking for too much, that your needs are somehow excessive, that you're too sensitive or too demanding. And how could you not feel isolated when isolation is the very tool being used against you? Silent treatments, stonewalling, slowly cutting you off from friends and family until you have fewer and fewer people to turn to, especially at the exact moments you need support the most. Contrast that with how you feel when you're simply alone, in your own company, with no one else around. There's a stillness there, a kind of peace. Nobody is hurting you in that space. But the moment this person enters the picture, harm becomes part of the routine, again and again, in ways big and small. Every time you reach out hoping for comfort or acknowledgement, what comes back is rejection, criticism, blame. You get told that you're the source of the problem, that voicing your feelings is somehow you tearing everything down. How could that not leave you feeling utterly alone when every attempt to be truly seen gets punished, when you're made to feel like nothing more than an inconvenience just for having needs at all? The second hidden truth is this: they know exactly how strong, resilient, and capable you are, but they will never say it because your strength threatens them. It makes them feel small, insecure, exposed. Underneath all the bravado, you are like sunlight to them, and your brightness is unbearable. They can't tolerate how naturally people gravitate towards you, how at ease others feel in your presence, how your empathy draws people close. Some part of them wishes they had that same quality, not because they want to grow into a better person, but because they want to harvest that same magnetism for themselves, to use it as fuel. Beneath the surface, there's real jealousy there. Jealousy over the fact that their abuse hasn't managed to fully unmake you. They wonder why you haven't been destroyed. After all, in their mind, they're all powerful, capable of anything, and yet here you are, wounded but not erased. Yes, their cruelty has left marks. You've been shaken, hurt, worn down in places, but you're not gone. You're not finished. And that reality is intolerable to them, because it means they've failed at the one thing they wanted most: total dominance over you. That failure eats at them. They know somewhere deep down that you have it in you to rebuild, to rise again like something reborn from ash. But what they want is for you to believe the opposite, that you are nothing but the wreckage, that the wreckage is all you'll ever be. They want you trapped in the darkest corners of what they've put you through, kept there permanently, because the moment you find your way out and rise above it, it proves something they can't bear to face, that they never actually had real power over you at all. The third truth they'll never voice is even colder. Underneath the performance of love, there's often something closer to hatred, and they want you convinced that their feelings for you outweigh your feelings for them, when in reality you are simply a source of supply to be used. Somewhere in the depths of their psyche, they see you as an adversary, someone whose downfall they quietly root for, because your struggles are where they find their sense of triumph. Watching you unravel gives them a feeling of power. They want you exhausted, depleted, worn thin, even struggling with your mental health, because in some twisted internal logic, your suffering becomes proof of their own superiority. They'll mock your efforts. They'll shrink your accomplishments down to nothing, framing them as things anyone could have done without trying. And then, almost in the same breath, they'll toss you a small crumb of affection, and if you push back, they'll claim it was only a joke, that they didn't really mean any harm, because losing you completely isn't in their interest either. But make no mistake, when the mockery happens, it's not a joke to them. It's real. It's intentional. The fourth thing hiding beneath the surface is this: they are fully aware that your perception of events is accurate, and yet they will work relentlessly to convince you that you can't trust your own mind, because that confusion is their most effective weapon. It's the mechanism behind every instance of manipulation and gaslighting you've experienced. If you were able to see the situation with total clarity, if you could see straight through their behavior for what it is, you would leave, and with you would go their supply. No one would fall for the manipulation anymore. No one would validate their version of events. You would see them for who they truly are. and that clarity would repulse you enough to want nothing more to do with them. So it becomes essential, from their perspective, to not just tell you that you're misreading things, but to actually convince you of it, to plant seeds that make you doubt your own sanity, to insist that you're imagining things, exaggerating things, or that events simply didn't unfold the way you remember them unfolding. The fifth truth is almost eerie in its emptiness. There is no fixed, authentic self underneath all of it. What you're interacting with is a patchwork, pieces borrowed and stolen from every person who came before you, including pieces taken from you. They collect fragments of personality from the people they encounter because somewhere inside they believe they're entitled to simply take whatever they want. They'll start speaking the way someone else speaks. They'll dress the way a previous partner dressed. They'll suddenly develop interest in your hobbies, absorb them, claim them as their own passions. They might even chase the same career path you're on, not out of genuine interest, but because they genuinely don't know who they are without borrowing from someone else. Strip away all of these stolen fragments, all these costumes assembled from other people's identities, and what's left is someone hollow, someone with nothing authentic to offer, someone who isn't actually equipped for real partnership, real family life, or anything resembling a sustainable future with another person. They don't fully understand their own purpose beyond feeding off others, and that's the uncomfortable truth they'll never confess. If you look closely at your own ideas, your own habits, your own way of thinking, don't be surprised if you find traces of it reflected back in them, because somewhere along the way, they may have quietly absorbed it and repackaged it as their own. In their mind, this kind of theft feels justified because they view you less as an independent person and more as an extension of themselves, something they feel entitled to use. The sixth truth is a heavy one. The betrayal you've already uncovered is likely just a small fraction of what's actually happened. There is more, much more hidden beneath the surface, and there's a good chance you'll never uncover all of it because deception has become second nature to them. They've spent this entire relationship being strategic, calculated, always staying one step ahead of your awareness. Remember that early period, the one that felt almost too good to be true, full of intense charm and grand promises? Much of that was performance, a carefully constructed persona designed to hook you, and underneath it was already the seed of the greatest betrayal you'd face. Remember, every time they pointed out your flaws, framed you as the source of every problem in the relationship, somewhere inside they knew that wasn't the full truth, but blaming you was easier than ever owning their own behavior. Dishonesty comes as naturally to them as breathing. In nearly every moment you've spent together, some layer of deception was present. There is information they've deliberately withheld from you, information significant enough that if it ever surfaced, it would shake you to your core. But revealing it was never in their interest, because they knew that if you found out sooner, you would have walked away long before now. In many ways, they are little more than a collection of concealed secrets, secrets they've kept buried, convincing themselves it was somehow for your benefit. And the seventh truth might be the most unsettling of all. Your suffering brings them a strange kind of satisfaction, while your happiness brings them discomfort. Call it a form of emotional sadism, if you want, but there is real pleasure for them in watching you struggle because of something they've done, in seeing you anxious, walking on eggshells, hyper alert to their moods and reactions. That heightened tension in you makes them feel significant, feel powerful. When you're afraid, when you're overly attuned to their emotional state, trying desperately to manage the atmosphere around them, they notice, and on some level they enjoy it. Your pain in a strange way becomes their source of joy. Meanwhile, whenever you're struggling, sometimes they'll swoop in to help, but the motivation isn't genuine concern. It's about making themselves feel important or needed. If that opportunity to feel needed isn't there, they may simply withdraw and leave you to handle it alone, even if they're fully capable of helping. Your joy, on the other hand, becomes something like pain for them, because their sense of self depends on feeling superior to you, or at least being perceived that way by others. Every time you succeed at something, some part of them registers it as a personal loss. They internalize your victories as though they were direct attacks on their own identity, since in their worldview, everything ultimately circles back to them, and anything you achieve somehow impacts them, which stirs resentment, which then gets redirected at you as punishment. So when you land a promotion, they'll act like it's nothing special, like anyone could have done the same. When you get a raise, they'll dismiss it as insignificant, even though deep down they recognize it as the meaningful accomplishment it actually is. But admitting that out loud would mean acknowledging you might be outpacing them, and that possibility is intolerable. So instead, they minimize it, undercut it, chip away at your confidence, all while their own deep insecurity quietly drives the whole performance. That was the seventh secret. And honestly, all seven of them paint the same picture from different angles. A person whose entire dynamic with you is built on control, extraction, and the constant need to feel superior, all while making sure you never fully see it for what it is. I'd love to know which of these resonated most with your own experience. And if any of this touched on your own childhood, if you grew up under the influence of a narcissistic parent, I really do encourage you to look into that workshop I mentioned earlier, because there's meaningful healing work waiting there for you. That brings us to the end of this one. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next video. And until then, keep going, keep healing, because that process doesn't have to stop here.